Hello and welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast, your source for news in Hoosier Law, brought to you by Taft. I'm Jordan Morey, Managing Editor of Indiana Lawyer and your host. Thanks for joining us. Today is our last episode of 2022, and we're going to go out with a bang, bringing you headlines about judicial confirmations, abortion litigation, the Delphi murder case, and more. And after, we chat with our publisher, Nate Feltman, about his background in the law and his views on the state of journalism. So let's get started. Today is Wednesday, December 14th, 2022, and these are your headlines. Let's start off in Washington, D.C., where history was made this month on the Indiana federal judiciary. On December 5th, Judge Doris Pryor was confirmed to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, filling the Indiana seat that will open up when Judge David Hamilton takes senior status. A native of Arkansas, Pryor earned her law degree at Indiana University Maurer School of Law in 2003. Then returned to Indiana in 2006 to work in the Southern District U.S. Attorney's Office. Her most recent role has been as a magistrate judge in the Indiana Southern District Court, where she served since 2018. Pryor's confirmation is notable for multiple reasons. First, she was confirmed with a 60-31 vote, a bipartisan showing of support for a judicial nominee that's been rare in recent years. That support included both of Indiana's Republican senators, Todd Young and Mike Braun. Second, and perhaps most importantly, Pryor's confirmation marks a significant diversity milestone for the 7th Circuit. Here's Young introducing Pryor to the Senate Judiciary Committee back in July, when he discussed the wide support for Pryor's nomination and the historic nature of her appointment.
Since her name came up, I've heard an outpouring of support from across the Indiana legal community, including a diverse array of support letters that have been provided to this committee. I'd also be remiss if I failed to mention the historic nature of this appointment. If confirmed, Judge Pryor will be the first African American from Indiana ever to serve on the 7th Circuit.
The Indiana Southern District Court has already selected a new magistrate judge to take Pryor's spot, M. Kendra Klump, an assistant U.S. attorney for the Indiana Southern District Court. Shifting gears to state court, we have yet another update for you about the ongoing legal battle over Indiana's new near-total abortion ban. The ban had already been enjoined since September on Indiana constitutional grounds, but a second lawsuit challenged the ban on religious freedom grounds. On December 2nd, Marion Superior Court Judge Heather Welch entered a second injunction against the abortion law, determining it violates the state's Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The second lawsuit was filed by the group Hoosier Jews for Choice and by 5 anonymous plaintiffs, who argued the abortion ban, which would only allow the procedure within narrow limits, violated their religious beliefs. That includes the belief that life begins at birth, not conception, and that denying a pregnant woman the ability to obtain an abortion interferes with every person's inherent worth and dignity. The abortion law is already set to go before the Indiana Supreme Court next month in the case proceeding under the Indiana Constitution. But that's not the only abortion-related news we have to report. Here's Indiana Lawyer Editor Olivia Covington with the latest in a legal battle between the Indiana Attorney General and a prominent abortion doctor.
The name Dr. Caitlin Bernard is a pretty common one on our website these days, as she and Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita have been in a public battle over abortion-related issues since July. Here's a quick recap. In July, the Indianapolis Star published an article about Bernard, a doctor with IU Health who revealed that she had performed an abortion on a 10-year-old Ohio girl. The girl came to Indiana for the procedure because she could no longer get an abortion in Ohio after Roe v. Wade was overturned. The article ignited a media firestorm, and Rokita, a staunchly anti-abortion Republican, jumped into the fray and announced on Fox News that he was investigating Bernard for possible violations of patient privacy and abuse reporting regulations. From there, Bernard and Rokita engaged in a public back and forth that included a cease and desist letter, a tort claim notice, and ultimately a lawsuit against Rokita and a division director in his office. In the lawsuit, Bernard and her medical partner, Dr. Amy Caldwell, asked a judge to prevent Rokita's office from pursuing investigations into consumer complaints filed against them. With that background in mind, here are the latest updates. On November 30th, Rokita filed an administrative action against Bernard's medical license with the Indiana Medical Licensing Board. Like he first said back in the summer, the complaint claims Bernard violated patient privacy regulations by discussing the Ohio girl's case with the media. Also, he claims Bernard failed to properly report the rape of the Ohio girl to Indiana authorities. 2 days later, on December 2nd, Marion Superior Court Judge Heather Welch issued an order denying Bernard's request for an injunction against Rokita, but also finding that Rokita violated Indiana law by discussing his investigation with the media. Both parties claimed the ruling as a victory. Then on December 8th, Bernard's team voluntarily dismissed the action against Rokita and his office, saying doing so would allow them to preserve their victory, which they say is the ruling that Rokita violated state law by publicly discussing the investigations. Now, Bernard's lawyers say their efforts will be focused on fighting the action before the Medical Licensing Board, which Welch ruled now has jurisdiction over the underlying questions in the case. There are a lot of moving parts to these proceedings. You can read each filing and court order in detail on our website.
As always, we'll keep an eye on each of these lawsuits and bring you updates as they happen. Speaking of high-profile court cases, here's an update in the case against Richard Allen, the man charged with killing Delphi teens Libby German and Abby Williams. At the end of last month, Special Judge Fran Gall unsealed the probable cause affidavit supporting the murder charges against Allen. The affidavit was redacted, but a few major takeaways became public. First, an unspent bullet found between the girls' bodies in February 2017 had been cycled through a gun that Allen owned and that he said he had never let anyone borrow, according to the Associated Press. Also, the affidavit revealed that Allen had been walking on the Monon High Bridge the day Libby and Abby went missing, the same bridge the girls had visited that day, according to AP. Also, 3 juvenile witnesses claimed they saw a male walking away from the bridge wearing clothes that looked, quote, muddy and bloody. While Gall, serving as a special judge, allowed the probable cause affidavit to be unsealed, she also imposed a gag order on attorneys, law enforcement, court personnel, and the coroner involved in the case, AP reported. Anyone covered under the order cannot discuss the case with the public or the media directly or indirectly, including through social media. Another outstanding issue in this case is whether Allen's trial will be held in Carroll County, where Delphi is located. His team has asked the judge to move the case at least 150 miles away, arguing he could not receive a fair and impartial trial in Carroll County and the surrounding areas. We're still waiting on a ruling on the change of venue motion. We'll let you know when that comes down. Next up, we have some news about 2 elected judicial officials who have found themselves in some disciplinary trouble. On December 1st, Gibson Circuit Court Judge Jeffrey Mead was charged with 4 disciplinary charges and a filing by the Judicial Qualifications Commission. That same day, Wells County Prosecutor Andrew Carnell was publicly reprimanded by the Indiana Supreme Court. In Mead's case, the 4 disciplinary charges relate to his handling of 2 child welfare cases. In one case, a paternity action, Mead is accused of showing, quote, impatient, undignified, and discourteous behavior toward the father. That includes telling the father to shut up, accusing the father of passing his child off like a football, calling the father bro, and using explicit language from the bench. In the second case, a chins action, Mead is accused of presiding over an off-the-record, unrecorded hearing in his chambers. Among the issues reported from the hearing was that exclusion of certain counsel and Mead's request that counsel for one party, but not the others, help prepare the minute entry after the hearing. The 4 charges against Mead include allegations that he violated 6 rules of the Indiana Code of Judicial Conduct. He has 20 days to respond to the charges, although he's not required to do so. Meanwhile, in the case against Carnell, the prosecutor was publicly reprimanded for his interference in an interaction between his son and law enforcement. Carnell's son had been pulled over on suspicion of operating while intoxicated. The officer called Carnell from the scene and he encouraged his son to cooperate. However, Carnell then spoke to the officer again and he was permitted to come to the scene and get his son, who was acting belligerently. His son was ultimately not arrested. According to the Indiana Supreme Court, Carnell self-reported his misconduct to the Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission and publicly and privately apologized for his actions. In addition to the reprimand, he was ordered to pay $273 for the cost of the disciplinary action. In both Mead and Carnell's cases, the incidents are their first disciplinary actions. To wrap up today's headlines, let me briefly tell you about a story I'm working on for the December 21st issue of Indiana Lawyer. This past year, multiple cases involving gender marker disputes have come before the Court of Appeals of Indiana, particularly ones where parents have petitioned to have their transgender child's gender marker changed on their birth certificates. In one consolidated case this past summer, a COA panel split twice, resulting in the Attorney General requesting the Supreme Court take the case. While plaintiffs disagreed with the AG's arguments, they agreed they wanted the High Court to take the case as well. In a different case, on December 6th, the COA ruled that the judiciary had no authority on the matter and that the legislature had to make the changes. Thus, a gender marker change couldn't be made. So what are the different laws regarding gender marker changes? And what should we expect as the matter remains unresolved? I'm speaking with attorneys as well as experts on LGBTQ law about the issue. Be sure to pick up the December 21st issue of Indiana Lawyer to learn more. All right, that's it for this week's headlines. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we won't have another episode until January. Until then, you can keep up with the latest legal news at theindianalawyer.com. Stick around after our sponsor break for our final interview of the year. We'll see you all in 2023.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
For this week's extended interview, from just down the hallway, we have IBJ Media President and CEO Nate Feltman joining us in the studio. Nate, thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here with you.
If you didn't know, Nate is the publisher of Indiana Lawyer, Indianapolis Business Journal, and the Court and Commercial Record, and CEO of Inside Indiana Business. Previously, he was the CEO and co-owner of Genesis Healthcare Services, LLC, and Home Health Depot, Inc., a home medical equipment company. Nate is a lawyer. He served as a partner at the law firms of Faegre, Baker, Daniels, and Ice Miller in Indianapolis, Altimer and Gray in Chicago, and an associate at the Moscow, Russia office of Baker and McKenzie. His legal practice focused on representing public and private companies with their merger and acquisition activities, as well as advising local governments on public-private partnerships and economic development strategies. Nate was appointed by Governor Mitch Daniels as Secretary of Commerce for the state of Indiana and CEO of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation from 2006 to 2008. From 2005 to 2006, he served as Executive Vice President and General Counsel to the IEDC. Nate is an IU Kelley School of Business and IU McKinney School of Law grad, served on numerous boards with IU. We were discussing beforehand, you've also served on numerous boards throughout Indiana. So to begin, Nate, I'm going to give you the same question we give pretty much all of our guests. Why did you decide to become a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I wanted to do a lot of different things in life. And for some reason, early in life, and I had the idea that maybe law could be a path that would give me exposure to lots of different types of situations. I also had a strong interest when I was growing up in what was going on geopolitically. I think I was fortunate probably to be influenced by a relative, my uncle, who had made a trip to the Soviet Union, and he influenced me a lot, just some of the stories that he came back with. And so I got really interested in what was happening in the world. And as I went down to IU as a freshman, I began to take some really interesting courses like arms control classes and business classes. And I just started to think about what field and what professional school perhaps would give me the best opportunity to be engaged in some really interesting things at a really interesting time in the world, which was the late 80s and early 90s, which when I was down at IU, that's 88 to 92. And as you know, Jordan, there were a lot of interesting things happening in the world with the Berlin Wall coming down and the Soviet Union collapsing later in 91. These events happened while I was an undergrad. And so I couldn't wait to eventually to get to law school, because I thought, how am I going to get myself perhaps, and I'm studying Russian language, by the way. I also have a degree from the College of Arts and Sciences as well as business school. And taking Russian language, I just thought, gosh, with what's going on in the world, to know Russian language at that time might be an asset. And I was interested in business and law. So when I went to the Soviet Union in 1990 as an undergrad, and it's then when it was cemented that I wanted to go to law school. And I thought, gosh, there's going to be a lot of businesses coming to the former Soviet Union. It felt like things were going to open up, and they did. And so I couldn't wait with my law degree to get back there, and which I did. I went back during law school, and I went back after and practiced law in Moscow in the 90s. A very fascinating, interesting place in a much different world than, of course, we're living in today.
I'm going to go a little out of order, Jordan, but since we're talking about your time in Moscow, tell us a bit more about that and what that experience was like.
It couldn't have been more interesting. At that time, it was the place that everybody was talking about. So the world was talking about, you had 70 years of communism. So the world was talking about the changes that were taking place in the previous Soviet Union and the new Russia. So the great part as a young lawyer was that I had the advantage, not knowing, when you graduate from law school, you know a little bit. Law schools teach you how to think, problem solve, have some analytical skills, write. But the practice of law is where you start really learning skill sets. And so going to Russia, I had the advantage that there were no Russian lawyers that knew, in the new economy, they were used to the Soviet system, which is completely different than a market economy legal system. And so as I got there, I wasn't disadvantaged to the Russian lawyers and all the Western lawyers, and there were many that were setting up firms and who I got to know. They were all trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to negotiate contracts in this new system? New laws were coming on the books every single day. So new law on corporations, new law on intellectual property, new real estate laws, you name it, there were new laws coming on the books. So for a young lawyer, it couldn't have been more interesting to be there and try to figure out. Of course, the court system was completely underdeveloped. And so you didn't know whether what you were drafting and the contracts that you're writing, how well they would hold up. You'd always have to have jurisdictionally contracts that were arbitrated in places like New York or somewhere in Europe. And so it was for a young guy just out of law school. I mean, it couldn't have been more fascinating. It was a wild time.
Did you find that the skills you developed in Russia were transferable when you came back to practice here?
Yeah, the most important skill was thinking on my feet because I got thrown right in. I was fortunate enough, and because it was just new to everybody, I got thrown into dealing with clients like the general counsel of Ford Motor Company. I mean, here's a 25-year-old, recent graduate from law school, dealing with the general counsel of Ford Motor Company who's setting up, Ford Credit for the very first time in the previous Soviet Union, and trying to figure out how to do that. So the skill set of thinking on your feet, learning how to, if you don't know something, say, let me get back to you on that. These are all skills that, as you climb the ladder, whether in a law firm or solo practice, we don't always have all the answers, but, lawyers are trained to try to figure them out and problem solve. And so problem solving, thinking on your feet, client relationship, developing client relationships. I mean, those are all skills that successful lawyers, do develop. And those are the ones that I was fortunate enough to just get thrown in and had to learn on the spot. So it was, I was dealing with people much my senior, and that was a great advantage. I had great mentors, which, is key in legal practice.
Mitch Daniels will soon retire as president of Purdue University. How did working for the governor's office change your views on the law?
That's a good question. The most important piece there is, and this is, lawyers are notorious for raising their hand when there are needs in the community. And so I would relate my experience there to a lot of lawyers. I was one who rose their hand and said, I want to be part of what Mitch Daniels offered. And that was changed in Indiana. And as he liked to say, aiming higher. That's the spirit that, we all that volunteered to go into those jobs and left law firms and left, there are a lot of lawyers that participated in that change. One of the things that just sticks out in my mind is the importance of public service. It doesn't matter what party affiliation or what ideologies you have. I mean, it's just important that smart, hardworking, driven people will say yes when there's an opportunity. And a lot of them did say yes and continue to say yes for administrations, but working with Mitch Daniels and now my co-owner here at IBJ, Mickey Maurer, was the best professional experience of my life. I mean, I've had a lot of great ones. The one we just talked about in Russia was one of them. But to work with the caliber of those two individuals that came at their jobs with integrity, with hard work and new ideas, that was rewarding. And I just say that lawyers, they serve. They that's their job. It's a calling. That's why a lot of lawyers go to law school, is because they want to serve their clients. They want to serve the community, and we're fortunate. We've got some great firms in town and practitioners who say, I want to do a lot in the community, and they do.
Kind of building off that, what kind of impact do you feel like Mitch has made on this state?
Yeah, it's hard to put into words my feelings on that. The number one thing and he just talked about this last night at an event. I'm on the board of the Mitch Daniels Leadership Foundation. And the one thing that he talked about and that I think he has had an impact on is Hoosiers being open to change. And if you read Indiana history books and you read about Hoosiers in general through the last couple of centuries, one of the things that's often said in some of those books is that Hoosiers have been a little resistant to change, conservative, not in the political sense, but conservative values and conservative people. And Mitch brought, the idea that, if we want to be competitive, if we want to give people of no matter what your background is, opportunity to participate in a significant way in life, in civic life, in economic life, that we've got to try some new things, and that hopefully will be good for the entire population of 6.8 million Hoosiers. So that idea that of change and being open to change and realizing that we live in a world that's constantly changing is one of the most significant. You could name off dozens of policy things that he accomplished that I think were positive for the state, but the one I know that he thinks, because he said it last night, is one of the most important, is just that Hoosiers being open to change and willing to do even better for not just the folks who are fortunate enough to go to law school and do all those things, but for every citizen that's even growing up in tough circumstances, how do we give a hand out to help raise everybody? And that's one thing that I'm proud of, that's how he thinks and that's how he acted.
Two-part question. So first, kind of looking back over, Jordan, read your background, you've gravitated toward more business, entrepreneurial side of things. So I guess first part, how did the law kind of influence that and how you approach business? And second, how did you end up here with us in the media business?
Yeah. So I would credit law with my sincere interest in business. When I went to law school, as you heard earlier, I was thinking about trying to participate in what was going on in the world, in the former Soviet Union, and that was moving towards a market economy. And I believe that focusing on business and contracts law and business law was going to be the best way to actually have an opportunity to do that. It turned out to be at least that path worked out for me. I've always had an interest in business as a kid, and I never thought that I would end up practicing law forever at a law firm. But I viewed it as incredible, and it was incredible experience working with corporations, private equity firms, you name it, business people who I saw them building, a business and how important to the community it was in those circumstances, that they were doing their jobs as entrepreneurs, as business people. They were hiring people and giving people an opportunity to work. And I always thought to myself when I was representing those companies that one day I wanted to be on the other end of the phone, that I was calling a lawyer for help on. And so I have, through when I did make the jump, when I left what was then Baker and Daniels to join a healthcare company called Home Health Depot and Genesis, as Jordan mentioned, I brought those skill sets, the mergers and acquisitions skill sets, with me, and so it was really helpful. We did 5 acquisitions in 3 years with that company. And in most of the companies I've been associated with, we do acquisitions. We did one here at IBJ. We bought Inside Indiana Business last year. And so the skill set that I developed as a lawyer and with great law firms, I was lucky to be at 4 really great law firms and have great mentors and people at each one, have made a huge difference in my ability to, I think, be successful as much as I have been anyway in business.
What about the media business in particular? What was your interest in this?
there's one guy responsible for my interest in the media business.
I bet I can guess.
And you can guess who that is.
Is it Mickey Maurer?
It's Mickey Maurer. And, I had the fortunate opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, when I worked with Mitch Daniels, it was Mickey Maurer who reached out to me and said, why don't you come work with me with Mitch for a couple of years? And it ended up being 4 years at Mitch's first term. I had no idea I'd end up in the media business. I had no idea I'd end up in the healthcare business. I also happen to be in another business I never thought I'd end up, which is the liquor industry. So, life takes interesting paths. But when we sold our healthcare company back in 2017, Mickey approached me about the opportunity. He views IBJ Media, as do I, and working with Mickey for over 20 years now, rubbed off on me that the importance of having a locally owned company that's focused on our community, a media company that's focused on what's happening here, the important things, and calling out things that need to be called out in our community. It's been a real just honor and joy for me to be part of the history of the IBJ, and I'm excited to be a part of it for many, many years to come.
Kind of building off that again, why do you feel that's important that we have a publication like Indiana Lawyer?
I've been a student of government in different political systems, and I've always believed and been fortunate enough to see it in action when I was part of. I've been around government in different capacities. One with Mitch Daniels, but I've had some other experiences too. I've always believed that the role that the media plays in terms of the fourth estate, of holding public officials accountable is important. Reporting on what's happening is and keeping the community aware of what's happening, and really simply being a megaphone and a microphone like we're talking right now about important things that that are transformative or opportunities, challenges that are happening in the community. So I didn't quite realize how important until I took the opportunity to be a part of IBJ and the Indiana Lawyer, and now inside the Indiana business. But I see such an opportunity for us to play even more significant role because of the challenge in the media landscape that we all know about in terms of the shifts, and we're doing well, but I want us to do even better in terms of covering the entire state, and that's why we were interested in acquiring Inside Indiana Business and do even more and reporting. And so I'm loving it, and so happy that I made the decision to join.
So we always end by asking guests what they want listeners to know about them. And we'll pose that to you in the context of, being the publisher of these 3 media outlets. What should we know about you?
Gosh, I should have listened to the podcast a little.
That's right.
A little more frequently, apparently, and remember that's what you're going to ask. I think one thing I kind of referenced a little bit is that I want IBJ and our affiliated entities, the Indiana Lawyer, the Inside Indiana Business. I want us to be a part of this community for forever. I mean, as long as I'm around. And so I'm a guy who's up for a challenge. I like challenges. That when I entered healthcare, it was a really challenging time to be in healthcare. When I entered media, a lot of people said, "Now, why are you doing that? Media is under so many struggles and challenges." And I actually, when I see a challenge, I think opportunity. So maybe that's the thing that I would say is that I often view challenges as opportunities. When some people are running away from something, that tells me that maybe there's opportunities for somebody who wants to come in and be creative and thoughtful and find good people and teammates to work together to build something. So that's kind of one of the things that maybe I would be responding to that question. One of the things that kind of makes me tick. I like a challenge. I think it's one of the reasons why I love the practice of law. When I was practicing, I learned so much, but I was ready for the next challenge. And everything I've done in my professional life has been about trying to learn something new and be challenged in some way.
I'm going to throw a slight curveball. That's not going to be the last question.
Oh.
So you've worked multiple places, but are continuing to call Indianapolis home. Why are you invested in this community for the long haul?
That's a good question and important one. This community is just special. I didn't quite realize how special it was really until I left it for 9-10 years, which I did after graduating from law school. And I lived and worked in Moscow, and then I lived in Chicago for 5 years practicing law. There was always, I remember even telling people that in Moscow, and it was in the early days of me practicing law there, that I thought I'd end up back in Indiana. It's just a special community in terms of people want to help people here, and they do, and their volunteerism is unbelievable in this community. We always report on how many volunteers show up for all the events when we host Super Bowl or the Final Four and all those types of things. There are so many people who are invested in this community, and it's just special. It's a special place. I think if you have the initiative in this community and really want to do something, that the doors are open here. And I've heard often, and I've traveled a lot around the country, especially when I was in the role of Secretary of Commerce, that not every community is like that, where you can, sometimes it depends on what school you went to, or high school or college. And in this town, the door is open if you want it. If you want something and you want to learn something, or you want to be part of something, whether it's a board, whether it's a volunteer opportunity, there are people who will make sure that you get an opportunity. That's pretty special, and that's not in every single community throughout our country. And we've seen through the history of Indianapolis that people care more than just about their own company, their own welfare. They care about the community. And that's been a feature for decades here. And that's what makes me want to always be here and never want to be anywhere else.
That'll do it for this week's episode. Thanks again to IBJ Media publisher and CEO Nate Feltman for joining us. To catch up on previous episodes of the Indiana Lawyer podcast, be sure to visit theindianalawyer.com or your favorite streaming service.
And I'll just add that this is our last episode of 2022. We will see you in 2023.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.